Talking financial organization and a professional practice does not have to be boring. Are you ready for a few money in, money out ideas? It's Susan Gunn coming directly to your head to make you think. Can you handle the truth? Because she is known for being energetic, laughs a lot, and gives honest, sometimes direct, but always practical advice. It's time now for Money In, Money Out.
Welcome back to another podcast of Money In, Money Out. It is my pleasure to be with you again. I don't have a guest this time, but boy, do we have a lot to cover. We have covered a lot since this whole pandemic started 2 months ago. Isn't it amazing? You know, in a lot of ways, it seems like it's been a couple of years. We still have a little bit further to go down the road, but we're all making it, right? Where are we at right now? Well, some of you have started back to work, but unemployment is still at an all-time high. The only thing that we have to compare with this historically, with what's going on, is the Spanish flu and the Great Depression. And everybody's talked about it, but I decided to take a deep dive into history. I kind of got absorbed in the research and really found it interesting. World War I began a global war from July 28th, 1914 through November 11th, 1918. Okay? Well, the Spanish flu pandemic overlapped that. It started a battlefront of a different enemy before World War I even ended. The pandemic began on January 1918, they estimate, and lasted through 1919, but some say even December 1920. In fact, most historians contribute the spread of the virus to World War I itself by the deployment of troops. And so that's how it made it around the globe. Because back then, society was most certainly not as mobile as it is in the 21st century, right? I learned about the Spanish flu pandemic from my mom, who was a genealogist. Our vacations were most often centered around digging through old dusty courthouses and weed-filled cemeteries. I was really curious why a lot of people died in those cemeteries in 1918 and 1919. And I kept asking questions. You know what the answer to those questions were back then, right? Go look it up. And that was before Google. It was really torturous, but I looked it up and I found out what went on. Businesses back then were disrupted economically. People cared for family that had the virus or had the virus themselves. Not many were unaffected by the Spanish flu. They did stay at home and they did wear masks. I thought that was interesting. But after the pandemic, businesses rebounded to the roaring 20s. The economy grew. There was a boom in construction and real estate following the war. We think of the roaring 20s as the era of prohibition. Well, some of us think of it that way. But we most often forget what led up to it was World War I and the Spanish flu. Isn't that interesting? So a resurge after a 2-year pandemic and a war. But less than 9 years later, after the peak of the Spanish flu, on October 29th, 1929, the Great Depression began with Wall Street crashing. In the first 10 months of 1930, 744 banks failed, and in all, 9,000 banks failed during the 1930s. When they crashed, so did all the money and savings of our ancestors. In fact, that's what I think started the idea of hiding money under the floorboards, the mattresses, and in the walls. For years, I heard about the two sisters that built a house next door, that they had hid money in their walls and in their floorboards. We always wondered. By 1933, the unemployment rate was 25%. These past few days, many have warned that the unemployment rate is closing in to 25% now, quote, rivaling the Great Depression. I don't know about you, but I don't want to rival the Great Depression. That was then, this is now. Interestingly enough, I also wanted to point out, as kind of an aside, 1933 was also the year the Nazi Party became the official party of Germany, with Hitler coming to power the following year. Isn't that interesting? The worst year we had in America, the Nazi Party came to power in Germany. In those days, the average citizen did not have loans of exorbitant amounts. Home prices themselves were smaller, and the loans, if anything, were smaller still. There was no such thing as a revolving credit reports, or multiple page loan documents where the fine print must be read. Most loan docs were single pages, back when lending was still a handshake mentality. Obviously, my firsthand knowledge of the Great Depression also came from my parents. Dad said he learned to never be too proud to take over whatever job he could to make ends meet. My grandmom made biscuits for those hungry that stopped by her back door. My granddad worked at the local flour mill, so they had access to goods to help. The railroad was close by, and many men that were trying to find jobs would hop the rails, just trying to get somewhere that they could get a job. They'd get off the train because they were hungry, trying to find food, and Grandma would feed them on the back doorstep, is what she told me, daily. So word must have spread, I think, on the rails of where to find food. It would not be politically correct now to call them hobos, but that's what she called them. That didn't stop my grandmom, and it sure didn't stop her from caring about them, feeding them, and fondly remembering that time with the stories, while also she remembered how fortunate they were. Though only 25% lost their jobs, the 75% that had a job sure didn't make the same wages as they did before. My granddad was an example. He was in sales, but took a labor job at the mill to keep being paid. It was substantially less than he had made before, but Mom said they always had food on the table. In fact, when we asked her what it was like during the Great Depression, she didn't remember anything bad. And that probably had a lot to do with how her parents handled the situation. So as you guys that are parents are thinking about that now, keep that in mind. It's how you spend it at home on whether it's going to be a bad memory or a good memory for your kids. Historically, getting a loan during the Great Depression was nearly impossible. What can make or break us all during this time is the amount of debt we've incurred and the lack of an emergency fund to support us during the economic crisis. Hopefully, this will serve to teach us and not break us. Several episodes ago, I recommended you to keep on top of your loan payments. If you've not done so, speak with your lenders now. Discover your options for preserving your cash flow. Cash flow will be important for survival for the next year or two. Be aware, make sure you have a global perspective of what's going on, and maybe even a little bit of a historical perspective. It hasn't been all that long since we had a housing market crisis. If the economy does not get stirred, homeowners will be unable to pay their mortgages, and we will have another crisis. The CARES Act does not even begin to help with homeowners, by the way. In the past, if a crisis hit a homeowner, one monthly payment from the lender could be deferred. That means, for instance, payment 15 of the payments for that month was skipped and it was paid the following month instead. However, there is a difference between deference and forbearance. And forbearance is what the CARES Act addresses. Let me explain the difference. Let's take deference because it is actually deferring your payment to another date, typically for one time a year during a crisis in normal times, not now. This is anything but normal. Forbearance is what the CARES Act called for, but is not exactly helpful for a majority of mortgage holders. It allows to, quote, forbear the mortgage 1 to 3 months, But on that fourth month, all payments are due. So, for instance, the average American monthly mortgage payment is $1,029. That's the average monthly mortgage payment. If you receive forbearance for 180 days, which is 3 months, on that fourth month, you will owe $4,116. At the time, the lender may not allow the mortgage to be refinanced. In fact, many of them state that in their documents that you have to sign for the forbearance. Some smaller community-oriented banks are offering deferred payments, which will truly help during the crisis. Most mortgage lenders and large banks are only offering forbearance, when they may have offered deference, by the way, in the past. The CARES Act only provided mortgage relief with forbearance as an option with no penalties or fees, which is helpful. Some banks are going beyond what is required by the Act, though, and some are offering other forms of mortgage assistance programs. If you get in that bind, you need to check it out with your particular mortgage lender. I thought I'd bring up the housing market because I see this as a potential issue in the days ahead. When the housing market crashed during the Great Depression, it was a time many had their first-time home loans, and they were way overextended for what they could manage financially during an economic downturn. Does that sound familiar? The time to work out the details of your finances is not when a crisis is overtaking you. Work out the details now to keep your home safe. Changing gears a bit, there have been so many questions that are still up in the air for the SBA's EIDL and PPP. I have not received an EIDL advance, though I'm pretty sure I checked that box on the first day that form became available. Some received an advance within a few days of that, or within a week of filing that paperwork. I didn't. So I kind of figured I wasn't going to get anything. However, I received an EIDL SBA email this past week to create an account. I almost dismissed it because I'd already received the PPP, but it was the EIDL. Though there was absolutely no markings on the SBA portal that indicated which loan it was referencing. It did give me a loan reference number, which matched the documentations, the confirmation that I received after filing for the loan. That's the only way I could determine what it was. Within a few days after going online and creating the account, I received another email that I needed to go online again and enter deposit instructions. Interesting, right? Okay, it's a process. According to SBA.gov's website, the EIDL loans can be used to pay fixed debts, payroll, accounts payable, and other bills that can't be paid because of the disaster impact. The repayment of these loans are up to a max of 30 years. I read most of the loan documents, and I will tell you, before you get the loan, there are some things that you need to think about to make sure. Remember that the EIDL loan is an unforgivable loan that must be paid. If you pay it early, according to the documentation I've read up to this point, there will be no early payment penalties, which is the norm for SBA loans. However, there are some other implications by the documents that may apply to your business differently than they apply to mine. So you need to be sure that you read those documents thoroughly and that you go over that perhaps with your accountant or your attorney to make sure that that is what you need to do. The PPP is a potentially forgivable loan. A minimum of 75% must be used on payroll. Surely you've heard that by now, right? Well, let's define exactly what payroll is at this time. Salary, wages, tips, up to $100,000 annualized per employee. That's $100,000 for an employee's salary, not during the 8-week period. Payroll does not include the employer portion of Medicare and Social Security, health care, or retirement benefits. So in other words, it's the gross pay prior to taxes. Gross pay. However, the remaining 25% of the PPP can be spent on healthcare and retirement obligations, rent or mortgages, utilities, and interest payments on debt obligations incurred prior to February 15th of this year. Last Friday, the SBA's press release included a link to the PPP loan forgiveness application. I have included that press link in the description for this podcast, so be sure that you go on to the description, download the forgiveness application to review it, to ensure that you are on target. None of the lenders, by the way, I was told to say this, none of the lenders are accepting those forgiveness applications at this time. But I want you to download the application so you know what kind of monitoring and detail that you will be required to put on those applications for forgiveness. Here are a couple of things that I gleaned from the application. Alternative payroll covered period. I thought that was interesting. It's also helpful in my understanding of it. Quoting from the SBA form. For example, if the borrower received its PPP loan proceeds on Monday, April 20th, and the first day of its first pay period following its PPP loan disbursement is Sunday, April 26th, the first day of the alternative payroll covered period is indeed April 26th, and the last day of the alternative payroll covered period is Saturday, June 20th. This gives the PPP period a little bit of flexibility. Isn't that awesome? The second thing that I gleaned from it is eligible non-payroll costs must be paid during the covered period. This is a quote, by the way, or incurred during the covered period, or paid or before the next regular billing date. So it gives a little bit more spread to that 8-week frame. In fact, there's talk going on in DC that's spreading this out even a little further because of the lock-in and the potential of none of it being forgiven. However, please be advised, absolutely nothing has stayed the same ever in the last 2 months of any information regarding to guidelines. So you're going to need to stay on top of that or have a connection, me or Kate Williford or somebody that's providing that information to you. Also, you need to make sure that you're staying in communication with your commercial lender. They were the ones you need to be getting your information from, quite frankly. And stay on top of the SBA press releases. You can actually do a Google to have it sent to your mailbox if the SBA releases a press release. So here's a shout out to my commercial lender, Kate Carlson, who's answered a myriad of emails and phone calls, not only for my own information, but what I could pass on to my listeners. I love my Frost Bank, and the relationships that their commercial lenders maintain with their customers is one of the reasons why I bank there. And the reason that I say that is I have told you from the very beginning that you need to have a relationship. In this digital age, it was even more important to have a relationship with a commercial lender. And Katie is mine, has been for a great number of years. I can't even remember how long, 10, 15, something like that. Something I've heard quite a bit about from clients is how they were going to move from their big box bank when all this is over because of the lack of communication and the appearance of that big box bank not caring. Not so with Katie. Katie's been sending me emails and keeping me up to date on everything. With the onset of this digital access, again, many businesses have failed to keep up their relationship, and that has not helped them or in any other crisis for that matter. So moving on, let's say you have the PPP or the EIDL loan or both loans. How are you going to track it? Well, just so happens, if you're using QuickBooks, I developed a system and I wrote a blog post that's on my website at SusanGunnSolutions.com. It's under Media, blog, so you can go there to read it. In fact, I've been writing in greater detail in the QuickBooks Advanced book than even on the blog post. All of the information that's needed initially delayed the completion of the 2020 Advanced book. These podcasts starting and all the phone calls I was getting. I was working 7 days a week right there for like 7 weeks. And so as I was trying to wrap up the 2020 Advanced book yesterday and was reviewing the reports, I slowed down finishing the book. And I realized my perspective on the reports that you need to oversee had changed. So I took the information from the blog post and totally expanded on the directions in the Advanced book. Here is great news for you, just to let you know. If you purchased the 2019 or the 2020 QuickBooks Advanced book, I'm emailing you. Give me some time to get it to you, but I'm emailing you the additional information free of charge to help you successfully track your information. I want to help you, and that's how I can think of doing it. So the 2020 QuickBooks Advanced book will have it in there. So if you don't have that book, you could get that book. But if you've already purchased the 2019 or the 2020 QuickBooks Advanced book, then I am going to email you that additional information, those few pages. It's about 6-7 pages right now. If you need some additional assistance, don't waste time being frustrated. Go online and you can purchase a QuickBooks prepaid support option to ensure you have your QuickBooks designed to optimally track for the PPP and or EIDL loans. That's 2 hours of you and I working together to create your way to track it in your QuickBooks. I can help you. There were some questions when I posted the blog, so let me address a few of those now. Yes, I know that this is the PPP and the EIDL is a loan. And typically you create a liability account for loans. I get that. However, due to the reports that you can use for tracking and the reports that I give you great details on how to do, create it as an income account. Do not create it as a sub-account of patient revenue, but it is its own standalone parent account. If there is an unforgiven amount at the end of the 8-week period, a journal entry can transfer the remaining balance from the income account to a liability account. At this recording, there's been no information released as to what will happen with that unforgiven amount, although I did hear that it would roll over, be paid in 2 years at 1%, but not much in writing about that. The second thing, yes, in the advent of all the information and the still lack of complete detailed guidelines, create a PPP class and an EIDL class, EIDL, and a both class instead of just the COVID-19 class that I suggested. This will give you greater flexibility to track what is PPP, to track what is EIDL that is not PPP, and to track what is both that is both. If you're not in charge of your accounting, I implore you to stay in great communication with the one that is, hopefully your accountant. You need to develop a system with the loan forgiveness application in mind that will ensure maximum forgiveness. These past few weeks, I've received so many phone calls regarding help on QuickBooks, even small businesses not healthcare related. Suddenly, it's become apparent to everyone that either they completely understand the financial situation they are in, or they have never understood the reports and crave for that information to be in an understandable format. In fact, there have been quite a few QuickBooks Online conversions to save unnecessary monthly expenses and to better utilize the reports in tracking. In fact, I'll say that again, in QuickBooks, there is a tool you can use to estimate how long it will take you to recover. That's QuickBooks desktop version, by the way. The QuickBooks cash flow projector can be a source of guidance. Never before has this tool been recommended by me for businesses that are using dual accounting systems, such as dental practices. These practices use one system for accounts receivable, the practice software, and one for accounts payable, which is QuickBooks or their accountant. But during this time of ramping back up again, but not at full operational strength, the QuickBooks cash flow projector can be truly helpful. Here's my suggestion. At a minimum, estimate the next 3 months' income. Then do the same for spending, entering all your monthly expenses. Income will need to be manually estimated. Good luck with that. I know you guys don't have a clue what you're going to be making the next few months. But if you're doing one column dentistry, as a client told me the other day, then figure out what it would be for one column. To get an idea of the expenses, create a profit and loss report for September through October. So it would include September, October, and November. Get the total of each of those expense accounts and divide it by 3 to get a monthly average. Then enter those numbers into the cash flow projector. Okay, got that? This will take some time, but I believe that you will find it useful. And once the format is set up, you can continue to use it. Our last hot topic is about the insurance payments, including paying for personal protection equipment. Okay, I'm going to call them PPEs, but do not confuse this with our already covered topic of PPPs. There are 24 other characters in the alphabet, and I think we should let the P rest for a while after all this is over. Now, what about PPE insurance payments? First, not all insurance companies are paying for the additional required cost of PPEs. However, some are, and entering the payments is challenging but doable. I just wanted to tell you that. If the insurance company sends a bulk payment for PPE monthly, this payment does not need to be entered into the practice software. It's not paying for anything in the practice software. So all you need to do is deposit the payment separately from patient revenue. Write on the deposit slip the name of the insurance company, PPE payment. Okay? Or if you get 2 payments from 2 insurance companies, all you need to do is list them as Aetna PPE, Cigna PPE, Principal PPE, so that you know that that was paying for your PPEs. In QuickBooks, if you're using QuickBooks, create a PPE income account, not under the parent account of patient deposits, but a standalone income account. This is the account for which you will designate these insurance payments. And just as an aside, I'm really strongly suggesting that you create a separate production expense account called PPE. This is where you would designate all your additional PPE expenses. And they're great. I know what you guys are spending, and the demand for you to be safe is costly. And so create that separate account. If you're using QuickBooks, it'll be easy for you to do that. If the PPE insurance payment is included in the insurance check, receive it as a normal insurance payment for the patient. At this recording, it's my understanding that Cigna, Principal, and Aetna are doing just that. If you are in network, Delta says you can't bill the patient, that it is included in the cost of doing business and must be written off. Right. We all know the added cost of the PPE requirements. So it may be necessary to raise your fees for it to become a cost of doing business. It may be time to reevaluate. My colleague, Teresa Duncan, has a podcast called Nobody Told Me That. My buddy, love her to death. You would really enjoy that podcast. I encourage you to check it out. She is the guru with all things insurance and does stay on top of all of this information. I know this was a long podcast, just listening to me. I'm sorry. I hope I wasn't too boring. I promise it won't always be this way. And hopefully you just didn't totally get disgusted with the Texas twang that I know it's come from me being sequestered in my house. I have some great ideas, though, for the future to bring to your ears. I'm not sure what will be a normal topic in the future, but I'm hoping there will be a smattering of some normalcy in the future. My closing thoughts. I said in the first podcast that these were unprecedented times. That hasn't changed. If history has taught us anything, it is that we must be prepared for a crisis. Life will not suddenly go back to normal when we are allowed to work. And those of you that have been allowed to go back to work are finding out how true that is. It is anything but normal. Everyone that I've spoken with has stated that this year is marked to be their best year ever financially. Me included, by the way, with a slate full of clients and speaking engagements. That all changed in March. To go back to what worked in the past may not be a good enough endeavor. It may take 3 to 6 years to recover in a declined market. I actually hope we can in that amount of time. It will be even more important for you to know where your money is coming in and going out from this point forward. I cannot stress that enough. It is so important for you to know where your money is coming in and going out. Some of you have discovered that already. Having your financial systems in order will actually be a way for you to effectively oversee your business flow, comparing history at the click of a report. If you need help setting up your systems for easier oversight, please let me help. I'm here for you. It's what I do. What you do today may matter for what is up ahead. If you take precautions and nothing happens, that's awesome. However, if you do not take precautions and something does happen, then you may have missed the opportunity to understand your finances more clearly. The choice is yours, as it has been all along. If you are a dual accounting system using a practice software for accounts receivable, that is 85% of your accounting and is the most difficult part to use in your accounting. QuickBooks is the easiest part. With downloading from the bank and the credit card companies, oh my gosh, it is a piece of cake. Please take this opportunity to get your financial systems in order and realize, listen to me. Though this may have been on target to be your best year ever, it still can be. It may not be financially, but determining to have our best year ever is a frame of mind. Success is not measured by your finances. At the end of the year, your best year ever will be determined by how you lived through an unprecedented time, how you used the time you were given, how your attitude was during those stressful times, how you loved on those around you, how you helped those who needed you. And if you feel discouraged, please reach out to somebody. Call me. A group of consultants created a video together for our community because our hearts hurt for that same community. If you haven't watched it, it's a pop-up on my website, SusanGunnSolutions.com. It was the result of a phone call I had from a young dentist who had been in practice for only 6 months before being shut down. She was in tears. We spent the next 2 hours together. I had her take out 2 pads of paper. On one, she wrote the things she could control, and on the other, she wrote the things she could not control. When we finished, she had a task list of things to do. But for the list of things she could not control, I told her this: the list of those things you cannot control are to remain on the list. At no time are you to pick one up from the list as if you can control it. You can't. That's why it's on the list. Leave it on the list and let it go. As you move through the next few weeks, you will determine there are other things that belong on either list. Put them on the right list. And again, if you cannot control it, then leave it there. So here's my heart-to-heart conversation with you as my listener. I would love to encourage you to do the same thing. Please do not become discouraged. This is your time to be strong. We need you to be strong. And remember, this can still be your best year yet. If I can help you, call me. And until the next time, I'm signing out. You've listened to me for 36 minutes, and that's long enough. Have a great week.
That's a wrap for this podcast of Money In, Money Out. Thanks for listening. Be sure to write down the most valuable tip you learned today so you don't forget it. And remember, you can find out more about all the valuable books and services Susan has to offer at www.susangunsolutions.com.